Through the narrow rocky valley, the traveling party were compelled to dismount and lead their horses on foot. The ground was broken and uneven, and had become slippery with ice and snow. Swirling above them, the sky was dark and gloomy. Their heads bowed against the stinging wind, they trudged on. Éomer had given Daenara an elven-made cloak, which kept her body exceptionally warm, but her heart was cold with despair. The Arctic breeze was restless. It did not only affect Daenara, but the entire party of men. The horses, too, were restless, tossing their manes, their breath misting as they whined with unease. Daenara and Éomer suddenly stopped, which in turn halted the rest of the party. They both felt the effects of evil. Several small gray rocks tumbled down the side of the left wall, drawing everyone's attention up toward the cluster of large rocks. A shrill wail pierced the icy air and rang sharp in their ears. Daenara's horse reared so violently, his reins were wrested from her hands. She tried in vain to calm the beast by clutching at his reins and speaking kindly. The men drew their swords in a state of readiness. Daenara sufficiently calmed the distressed animal to retrieve her sword, a gift from her brother that would not have been given in vain. "Be not far from me," Éomer said hurriedly to Daenara. His silvery blade shone like sharp light on ice, drawn and ready. The words had only just fallen, when from high up on the walls came descending down on them, like a great flood, a mass of hideous brutes that bore grotesque resemblances to men. A brilliant burst of sheer energy erupted from the readied Imperial Guardians with the power of their collective will, and blew apart the first descending wave, like an explosion. Pooling down from both walls came these wretches, their leathery gray skin almost as thick as armor. They were relentlessly hideous. It seemed impossible that they should have the intelligence to wield swords. Nevertheless, they did each have a menacing-looking blade, and they rushed forth with a great thirst for blood. The Guardians struck many down before the brutes could even reach them, throwing liquid-like spheres of energy that shattered bones and blew off limbs. A protective wall of force was also established, which slowed the Reavers' advancement as they were running underwater or against great winds. It was not long, however, before the narrow valley was flooded, and a fierce battle raged between the two opposing forces. The monsters had the greater number, but the Guardians fought with the ferocity of the gods against the ferocity of the devil. In the midst of it all, Éomer drew on an immense amount of energy, fueled by the fever of battle that burned in his chest, and propelled a dozen Reavers violently through the air. The vicinity round him was cleared briefly before he was again assailed. With a slash of his blade, Éomer cut deep into a brute's exposed chest. Then followed the stroke with another from his metal gauntlet, striking the wretch full in the face, mangling it into a blur of bloody flesh. Not far from him, Thedred hurled a shaft of heat which pierced the shoulder of another like a spear. His action prevented Éomer from being struck from behind, and both men exchanged a brief acknowledgment of kinship. Éomer was a fierce fighter. He cut down many foes, leaping over one to get to the next. Because of his lightness, speed, and nimbleness, he was not easily matched. More than once he shouldered and slashed a foe attacking Daenara. She drew blood with the swing of her own blade, with clean and precise strokes. Man and monster fell without discrimination in one confused, bloody mass. The cold flash of magic along with the clashing of steel was chaos round Daenara. Love, anger, hate, all rose in a storm within her, and a strong wind, which her own being seemed to conjure from an unconscious source, began to gather, becoming so fierce, her own hair lashed and stung her face. Her eyes were as dark as the storm that raged round her, and showed great penetration. For a moment she stood motionless, this volatile atmosphere tearing about her imposing form. Its tremendous gusts scattered the brutes in her path like leaves in a gale. Soon the destructive winds spent themselves. Her body suddenly depleted of strength. She staggered backwards a little and found her back against the rock wall. She started violently as one of her comrades suddenly slammed against it, very near to her, his blood staining the cold rock as he slumped, broken, to the ground at her feet. Frozen in terror, Dayanara saw the monstrous thing that had tossed the unfortunate man gaze up hideously in her direction. The hulking mass of advancing force that seemed to crush all in its path covered the short distance between them in an instant. Dayanara cried out as the sharp pain of its embedded claw stabbed into her shoulder and spread down her arm like 1,000 shards of ice through her veins. Seized by its vice-like claw, Dayanara sunk to her knees, panting, like a wounded lamb in the clutches of a beast. Her sword dropped from her hand and clanged to the stone. The sounds of battle were far off and distant as she looked up into the abominable face of her captor. The smile that twisted its lips was the smile one wears when he has securely fastened his victim and relishes the moment of victory before he savagely ends the torment.